Maybe I'll tell you a story that you remind me of.
Okay.
So a few years ago, CNN did a week-long series on back pain, and their editor wanted to do a TV interview with me. So the whole film crew came to our school, and he was a jogger.
What's jogger?
Runs.
Oh,
So we were sitting here like this, and he wanted to know something about, like you.
yeah.
And so I said, well, which I'll say to you now, you just notice how you're sitting in your chair and feeling your breath, and how your posture is in your chair, and if things suggest them to move and all that. And all of a sudden he passed out on camera, just passed out, fell on the floor. Oh, one of my students who happened to be there was a nurse.
Don't do that to me.
Said, well, he's okay. He's just fainted. And he came to in about 20 minutes. And I thought, oh, God, this is going to look awful on it. He's going to butcher me on CNN on it. But he didn't. So. But it just scared the hell out of me. So she said he had a hysterical reaction to getting in touch with his sensations. And people do that, actually. In the 60s, many people around the world who had been working individually for quite a long time, they suddenly came together. So the so-called human potential movement was actually a gathering in one place of a lot of people who had worked a long, long time before they ever came to Esalen. One of those people was Ida Rolf, who for a long time, she was 65, I think, when she came to Esalen. She'd worked for a long time studying various manipulative practices, how you can work with the body very deeply to look at it as a changeable plastic thing that can be radically changed by getting one's hands in and actually
touched you and
it's moving the soft tissues of the body, getting in deeply and with a certain vision of how to do it, to move the tissues around, to expand the body and give it more mobility and flexibility. So that was.
It's not a massage. It's
not a massage.
Oh, okay.
No, it's a very. It involves getting one's hands in and moving these large planes of tissue within the body. So it's and it's not about relaxing. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about really restructuring,
reshaping.
Yeah.
Got it.
So it's quite radical, and the consciousness results of that are quite amazing, because suddenly you have a different home.
Wow.
I had a desire to live a kind of a life of meditation and spirituality when I was graduated from college, and that was, in those years, that was one of the things available. I was very inspired by the Jesuit priest that I had in college. He was telling us that all of our spiritual practices were about transforming our body into immortal flesh, and how important it was to take care of diet and exercise and posture and all these kind of things. But the spiritual teaching didn't click for me. There was a zendo next to my theology school in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where one of the Esalen teachers led meditation every morning, Zen meditation. So he invited me to come up and sit with them. And so I went into the Zendo, and we had the instructions about sitting and breathing and all that.
Zendo is a Zen Buddhism
meditation. And there was something so amazing about sitting and breathing. I'd been taught to do this in the Jesuits, but the body didn't click. And then suddenly to sit there in an atmosphere that really paid attention to posture and breathing, the whole thing became obvious to me. The connection between really being in my body, really being in my breathing, feeling my posture. It just opened up the world of consciousness in a way that I had not been able to do. And a friend of mine, who was a Jesuit priest, was the first resident scholar at Esalen. He was invited to be at Esalen. And at that time, it was an amazing program. They would pick about 10 people And each person every week would get to spend private time with one of the big leaders at Esalen. And suddenly this man's body, he was a child prodigy, and he had graduated from college when he was 16, and he was big brain, big head, and all kind of bent over, and suddenly became this kind of wild animal. You know, he was just like transformed by Ida Rolf and Stanley Kellman and a lot of these body people. And I said, wow, this is really kind of amazing. So I started getting interested in all these body practices going on at Esalen. He would come, I would see him because I was studying across the bay from Esalen. And he'd come on the weekends to where I was studying. And his whole being was just changed. And I thought, this is kind of amazing. And at that point I thought, I'm going to do this. And so found my way into meeting Ida Rolf and getting Rolfed, and doing several sensory awareness and several other body things. And Ida was quite an amazing teacher. So eventually when I worked with Ida, it was so amazing to have these experiences where, say, I would have my rib cage worked on, and I'd feel all this expansion in my ribs, but my being would disappear. I would just feel one with the cosmos through my expanded breathing. Very powerful experiences. So it was so compelling that that's when I decided to be a Rolfer. So I left the Jesuits at one point and finished my doctorate in philosophy. And I actually did my doctorate in philosophy on the relation between changes in the body and changes in consciousness. So I was lucky to be able to be in a department that allowed me to do something interesting. And then I said, well, why am I writing about this? Why don't I do it? And so I asked Ida if I could join, and so she took me on as a student, and I practiced Rolfing for many years.
But
and
Rolfing
then there's a lot that comes from that.
But Rolfing is not what you actually invented, but it's not what you study, it's not what you do, right? No, Rolfing.
No, because that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was a really long time ago.
I'm trying to get to
kind of a long life.
I'm trying to get to somatic somehow, so to
sure.
understand.
Oh, sure. So, so that's the semicolon, and then somatics follows from that. So, okay, so the bridge from Rolfing to somatics.
I was just reading about somatics, and it was like a puzzle for me. I couldn't quite.
The first person to use the word somatics was my late friend Tom Hanna. In the old Greek word soma means the person. It didn't mean a thing body. It meant the whole person. And so Thomas took that word and he created a new journal called Somatics, and he wrote this thing about a new vision of a field that would bring together both serious, intense work with flesh and bones, as well as consciousness work and educational work, psychology, and all that. So that's how and then he did the magazine, and he became head of the humanistic psychology school. I started the somatic psychology program. Stanley Kellman started his somatic work in Berkeley, and Alana Rubenfeld in New York started her somatics integrative program.
So let me see if I understood you right. So the basic vision of somatics is like working with the body and working with your emotions, feelings, spirituality, meditation, all that together, right?
Yeah, make it break down even more. It's like because the way I would say it is to get rid of the word body in a way, 'cause it makes it clear. Right. To work with breathing, touch, gesture, sensory awareness, body feelings, and all that, along with other emotional counterparts, spiritual, all that.
And what does it do to a human being, this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, at the most obvious level, which was our bread and butter level, it healed all kinds of things that couldn't be done outward. So, like, for example, in my work as a Rolfer, kind of the bread and butter work were chronic pain symptoms. So there were, I just had half of my practice for people who had chronic pain, often back pain, shoulder pain, whatever, sciatica, that they just couldn't get any relief from otherwise, and pretty easily relieved. So there was a lot of, what attracted a lot of people to the work were symptom reliefs that could not be handled in other existing modalities. that was a good side and also a distracting side, because the core of the work was really transformation,
That's what I was going
of
to
which, you know, it's sort of like doing Navajo sand paintings or doing shamanic rituals, where the goal is not to heal your back pain, the goal is to change your relation to the world, right?
Yes, yes.
So many of us, just by trying to earn a living, got a little distracted by the symptom relief. So the somatics vision was how to get all of that together, to really maintain the kind of visionary work with the various practices to bring them together. So I was always having to deal with physical pain, and that was hard. And I got more interested in the broader aspects of education, and in how to change structures in the culture, how to change education, the structures of education, and how to change political structures. I grew up with really bad asthma. I couldn't walk down the block without getting spells, so I couldn't do any activities. I had these terrible hives all the time.
Hives?
Hives.
Like you couldn't breathe?
No, hives, rashes all over.
Oh,
the
rashes.
I had a really difficult birth, and I had a spinal anomaly called Forestier syndrome, where my spine doesn't move very much. So I had, starting in my 20s, I had really bad back pain. So that became a really good teacher in a lot of ways.
I'm sorry, a teacher? So
A teacher.
That was
Right,
your
because
teacher.
it kept driving me. I had these problems, and it was a test whether things were working or not. So Ida Rolf passed the test. Other people did. Some people say, "Oh, I could cure you in an hour," right? And I said, "Well," and now I have very little pain, even though I fell off a cliff, and now I have rods in my neck and rivets.
So your posture, you a bit stiff here?
Yeah,
So
because I have two long titanium rods here and rivets, and all these ribs were broken. But I feel really good. So, and I hike all the time, hike many miles, and do all kinds of stuff. So
yeah, you look very
that's by way of saying that pain has been a big challenge for me.
So it was also painful the whole life, yeah? The spine
I have pain all the time. I mean, there were
Mm.
times when I was rolfing that I would have to take a month off work. I couldn't. So I feel like sort of and sort of I took it for granted. I just got used to it. And I spent 2 months in India in the spring, and part of kind of doing a pilgrimage, and I realized, partly in the Buddha's footsteps, how much my life was dominated by pain and sickness. And I don't feel that way anymore.
Is it from working on yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Maybe it's just aging, but I don't think so, because there were certainly, I mean, you know, there were certainly the people I've worked with. There were always periods of relief and growing periods of relief. So, you know, I could go on another TV program about all the various methods, because I've done a lot of methods. And I've worked with fabulous practitioners, just brilliant practitioners. Like somebody mentioned here, the pain of rolfing.
Yeah.
My rolfer is brilliant. I don't sort of much pain about it. I think a lot of the pain of rolfing is due to lack of skill. Ida was not very painful. When I had my fall and broke my neck, I had this brace on, and there came a time when, and I knew what I was going to do. I already had a whole lineup of brilliant body workers that did fabulous work with me. But my neurosurgeon was the doctor in charge, so he was the doctor, right? So when I went to the neurosurgeon to have my collar taken off, just as a test, I knew the answer, but just as a test, I said, what can I do now to heal from this? He said, well, there's nothing at all you can do, because physical therapy doesn't do anything. There's really nothing, just live your life. And I felt really sad, because I felt so fortunate that I have all these people doing these various practices, that I, especially in that situation where I almost died and almost lost my movement. I mean, this was all paralyzed. could easily have been
So
a
doctors
paraplegic.
told you you're going to be paralyzed.
No, no, he didn't tell me I'd be paralyzed. He said there's just nothing I can do to rehabilitate, to get out of just what would be kind of a messy situation where I wouldn't have much function. So I just realized how lucky I am because you know, like I have this one practitioner. Well, I have about 4 of them I've worked with for 30 years now, and they're just fabulous. And they do things that nobody knows about, except a few.
So, like, and then you write about democracy and social activism. So how does this plays a role in this whole?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a really good question, because one of my first. That's the piece I left out. I was really struck when I first got Rolfed and got into these other things about how not only did it awaken my spiritual life or ground my spirituality in a wonderful way, but it also gave me a much solider foundation for my political beliefs. So I was involved in political radicalism for a long time. I was very much part of the anti-war movement. I turned in my draft card and was part of the resistance. But I noticed that after I got Rolfed, a lot of the fear of standing up for my beliefs disappeared. So I looked to body work both from the beginning, not primarily psychologically, but as steps both towards my spiritual evolution and or also towards my social evolution, to be a social activist.
So the doorway to the social activism was like you kind of didn't feel the fear anymore, and
Yeah, I felt I could stand. I could literally stand up for my beliefs. I mean, really, it was just very. There was very something in being really being able to be here, instead of kind of being, kind of.
Did it have to do anything with masculinity, or it's a different story? Because for
Say some more.
Because for Russian, well, I'm a Russian person, but
Yeah.
maybe it comes from my culture. We think that it's a masculine thing to stand up for your beliefs some way, but maybe.
Oh, I wouldn't buy that at all. I mean, I see what you mean. That is a stereotype.
Yeah.
But what about women? What are women doing to stand up against rapists and all that kind of stuff? I mean, I actually work with a clinic in Oakland, a rehab clinic for women. And the reason we're working there is a bunch of my students did a workshop there one day. These are women off the streets who are in serious rehab, addicts and prostitutes and stuff. They did a 2-hour workshop where they taught the women to stand on their feet and walk. And it absolutely blew their minds to the point where the staff asked my students to come back and train the staff. And then they asked them to do a year-long program. So there was something about these women it surprised me, even though I've done this work, that just to learn to tolerate, they could hardly tolerate it at first. To learn how to stand on their feet was such a huge healing.
So how are they standing then? Like I just want to
Well, it's not external. It's not an external thing. It's like, if you're kind of going around, you're not really on your feet, to pay attention to your feet is scary.
I see.
To learn how to really inhabit your feet, to really bring your consciousness into your feet is a big journey. It's like bringing your consciousness into your hands if you're not feeling something. I actually think the easiest way to understand what I'm up to is by comparison to the meditation traditions like Vipassana and Vajrayana Buddhism. And it's really looking at the results of what happens when you learn how to be here now, really here now, and looking at.
So maybe some people didn't do Vipassana. So can you just say what happens after you feel here now? What happens?
Well,
to you?
This is kind of the Dharma has moved to Marin County. I mean, Jack Cornfield is here with Spirit Rock, and it's just been a major opening to healing in various communities: the African American community, the Hispanic community, the recovery community. That learning those techniques, and it's big in the prison here in San Quentin. There's a big Vipassana community working with prisoners here that came out of Spirit Rock and out of our program. There's a person who graduated from our program who was involved at Spirit Rock who started the
Just
meditation
out of
program.
curiosity, what happens to those people? Like if the prisoners who go through vipassana.
You can imagine what it's like to be a life. I know maybe you can't imagine. It's hard for me to imagine what it's like to be a lifer in San Quentin. So so there's so much violence and so much horrible depression, all those horrible things. And Vipassana helps people to be at peace with the situation, which is life imprisonment. And so you get, there's been a great reduction in violence among the prisoners and depression and those kinds of things.
Take care of each other?
Yeah, right.
I have like another strange question. Maybe it's also from my culture. Some people say that, going to therapist, doing therapy all the time is kind of like, it's like an addiction. You kind of have to handle it yourself. But you should handle it yourself, being able. And this whole culture of, going to therapist, being worked on is
Oh yeah,
not very healthy.
I know the
that
stereotype.
attitude. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I have a different view of it. I actually was
please,
forced to pull some of these ideas together. In America, it's more an ordinary kind of thing for adults to get help with all the things that bother us: relationships, addictions, raising children, and facing death, facing disease.
So you look at it as a mentoring.
Sort of a mentoring is what I see. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't disable person. It doesn't make him more like dependent or.
Well, good therapists are actually working to deal with dependency and make people more independent. I mean, that's the whole point of good therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy has been really important to me. Psychotherapy, particularly Jungian analysis. I've been in Jungian analysis for many years. And body work and all the clarification of my emotional life and breaking down the walls that separate me from other people. Those have been really important. So no, I've had a lot of challenges.
Like seeing God come